There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the Media Mothership.
All right, welcome to Media Mothership, broadcasting out of Edge Radio Studios here in Nipaluna, Hobart, Tasmania. On Media Mothership, we explore how media can shape our understanding of the world around us. And we're streaming across edgeradio.org.au, as well as on YouTube and Twitch. Hopefully. I don't know, the technology always fails. But do jump over to YouTube or Twitch if you want to see the live video stream. And you can find us just by searching Media Mothership. We're also on the DAB, the Digital Audio Broadcast, the B. So you can message us either through YouTube and Twitch if you want to do a bit of audience participation, or SMS us directly into the studio on 048888 11707. I'm your host, Dr. Craig, PhD, joined by Ashley Remminga, PhD student.
Hello. Yes, for your audio-only listeners, I should also mention I'm trans. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
It's a great start because we are looking at this idea of fluidity, change, becoming. And specifically what we're going to do today is dive into your... I was going to say we're going to dust off your MA thesis, but it's still freshly minted, right? No, it's not dusty at all.
It's a little dusty.
Okay, we're going to, gently, well, not gently, explore the MA thesis titled, and I love titles of thesis projects because they're wonderfully chunky.
They're like a light novel.
They really are. Just the title themselves often is in itself a light novel. So the title of your thesis is Gendered Speech in the Inclusive Fandom, how gendered terms and transmisogyny shape the experience of gender-diverse cosplayers. So we're going to unpack a lot of terms, but the core takeaways, I guess, for me is cosplay features in this thesis. Yep. So we're going to talk a bit about what cosplay is. Fandom.
Absolutely.
So people who are fans, pretty self-explanatory, that one, I guess.
That one's a bit easy.
And then we've got gendered terms and transmisogyny.
Yes.
So transmisogyny in particular is a kind of toxic, critical, icky space.
Yeah, so I like to just explain it as like this sort of intersectional misogyny and transphobia.
Yes.
So it's a bit of like what you get when you get a form of discrimination towards trans women and trans feminine individuals.
So there's some really significant politics within the thesis as well that are being struggled with and challenged and questioned and interrogated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all that and more coming up on Media Mothership. Actually, I haven't really got my stinger ready. Normally, I'd go to a nice little jingle, but instead...
Just do a little jingle.
I always think I want to bring a musical instrument. Next time. Instead, what we'll do is we'll deflect into a YouTube piece. And the reason I've chosen this is that I've been looking for something that can be in conversation with defining some of the really interesting key terms in your thesis. And I thought we'd start with cosplay, as that's a term which, while it's reasonably common now, some people might be quite unfamiliar with it. So we'll look at how Kotaku, the popular culture online magazine, kind of tried to define it 7 years ago. So it's a video piece that they created leading up to a convention where they were going to, I think, focus on 6 or 7 key cosplayers. But they set it up, and basically they provide a little history and discussion of how someone unfamiliar with this might understand it. Yep. We're going to pause it and talk to it. It's going to be, I guess, a bit of a reaction.
Oh, I love reactions.
We'll have to hashtag it now. All right, here we go.
What is cosplay? Cosplay is the practice of dressing up as a fictional character, but is
All right, firstly, is that true? Cosplay is dressing up as a fictional character. Can you do non-fictional character cosplay?
Yeah, you absolutely could do a non-fictional.
Have you seen it? Have you seen
I
non-fictional?
have. I've seen people dress up as like Nicolas Cage. I've
There we go.
seen all sorts of Freddie Mercury. I've seen a whole bunch. So yeah, no, it doesn't have to be fictional. Although I would say generally it is quite common for it to be fictional.
Yeah, person dressed up as Spock from Star Trek with the ears. But look, you're right. I actually did see, I was talking off air about the fact that when I was at Dragon Con in Atlanta, I saw people cosplaying as Raygun, the Australian Olympic athlete for breakdancing. And there was a whole Raygun community. There was like 12 Raygun cosplayers, and they got together and they did a spontaneous breakdance. So yeah. So not necessarily
How did
only
it compare to the actual dance?
Oh, it was lame. I mean, it really lampooned it in terms of there's much video floating around of like they took it in turns to go on the ground and try and do that kind of helicopter move.
Yep.
Whatever, and some did the kangaroo move.
The kangaroo hop, yes.
And look, I think any publicity is good publicity at one level, right?
I mean, we're talking about it now.
Yeah. It's Australian soft power. Actually, it was the best Australian soft power I've ever seen. It's better than Crocodile Dundee cosplay.
Actually, I believe that.
Yeah. All right, so moving on now to the next way of defining cosplay.
Isn't that sort of strange? Well, let's make a simple comparison. On any given Sunday, you'll see all sorts of people dressed up wearing the jerseys of their favorite sports teams. The guy with the mullet covered in blue and red.
Okay, so sports. They're setting this up as saying, how can someone that's never cosplayed as Spock from Star Trek and gone shopping understand this? Sports is the way to see it. So I guess this is saying, like, when you go to the footy on Saturday and you're supporting your team and you're surrounded by people who are wearing footy jerseys of particular players, and maybe they've got some face paint on their face, they're cosplaying. Would you agree that that's a type of cosplay?
I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as cosplay.
Because they wouldn't, if you ask them at the sporting event, I love your cosplay, they wouldn't say, I am cosplay. They would say, this is not cosplay.
Yeah.
I'm just supporting my team.
Yeah, no. But I think there is some valid comparisons with it when you draw upon this sort of fan participation, the acts of putting on some sort of uniform that signifies a certain thing. So I
fanishness,
think,
definitely.
Definitely,
yeah, I agree. What it's sharing in with cosplay is they're both fan interests. And so we'll hear what he says next, because I think the clip explains it.
Red face paint is not really J.J. Watt from the Houston Texans. He's just expressing his enthusiasm for a team in the same way someone would dress up like Solid Snake to show their love for Metal Gear.
All right, so love. So they're saying that the similarity there is expressing their love for the thing. It could be a sporting team, or it could be they reference Solid Snake. Do you think that emotional outpouring is a key aspect of cosplay? I
think so, but also I think where they differ a bit is also this sense of, I guess, becoming the character. Whereas cosplay, you're showing love by sort of becoming this character. Whereas with sport, you're showing it by donning a particular outfit. It's that sort of mentality behind it, which slightly differs.
Yeah, because if you go to like a soccer match and maybe Ronaldo's playing, and you're wearing Ronaldo's jersey, and you get in conversation with someone, you're not going to be cosplaying as Ronaldo in that moment. You're not going to be saying, I'm performing Ronaldo now. You're like just a fan of his.
Yeah, certainly. And
yet, if you see someone who's dressed up as a Dragon Ball character, they might put on the voice.
Oh yeah, they'll put on the voice. They'll scream. They'll do the "It's over 9,000."
That's right. Yeah. So there's a theatrical dimension, but again, that idea of love seems useful. We were talking before off air, actually, about can there be the inverse of that? Can people cosplay something out of hatred?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's an example of something like that. But I think also there's a degree of appreciation even in the hatred.
Yeah.
So-
Maybe if you're doing a group cosplay and you didn't really want a group cosplay as
Yeah.
that thing, you could find yourself not committed into that space, and it wouldn't be as much fun.
Yeah, I think that's probably really...
Have you ever found yourself emotionally not expressing love in your cosplay?
I think I have cosplays in the past where I've gone back and gone, I didn't love that cosplay, but it was more I didn't like how I executed it, more so than I didn't like the character. I mean, there's characters I absolutely detest, but I love to cosplay them because, you know, I have that still appreciation. So
the uniform looked good.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I must admit, actually, I'm thinking about the rare times I've cosplayed, and they've always been very sad reasons. It's been, what's the easiest thing I've got around me right now to cosplay because I want to go to this event and you get in free if you're cosplaying. And so, yes, I've cosplayed, but really badly. And I cosplayed as the main character from Digimon.
Oh, which
Right?
one?
I don't know,
Which
the
Digimon?
one with the blue
original?
shirt, the blue shirt one.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I had a blue shirt, and then I turned my the dishwashing gloves inside out, and thought that looked good enough, and went in there, but it was really lame, and it wasn't at all out of love for Digimon. I had to explain what my cosplay was as well, and you realize, I guess what my point's saying is, if you're not cosplaying out of love, you're not really getting into it. And when people ask you why are you cosplaying as that character, you're not going to really do the cosplay performance and social contract that you're entered into.
Yeah. I will say, though, you can fall out of love with a character as you're cosplaying them. And my example is when I dressed up as Where's Wally?
Which sounds great,
It
right?
sounds
Where's
great,
Wally?
and it's great for the first 5 minutes.
It's so
but
funny.
By about 3 o'clock on that first day, when everyone's going, I found Wally for the 1000th time, and that you start going, have you found me? Why are you looking for me when you haven't found yourself?
And you get very meta, because you're so.
You start having a breakdown. You're like, I can't do this anymore.
That's so fascinating that there are some cosplays where the theatrics of them, the audience interaction of them, is actually frustrating, exhausting, and unfun after the first 5 minutes or so, as you say.
So I think that was, although I don't hate it on reflection, I still think it's one of my more fun ones and zany ones I've done. So,
but it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you're cosplaying, you might have an idea in the back of your head what the space will, how people will react to it.
Yeah, right? I think for me at least, I know every cosplay is different, but for me, I sort of look at it a bit with, how do I want people to interpret this? What sort of reactions am I prepared for? Am I not prepared for? Where am I going with this? How am I going to be this character and that? So
with Where's Wally, you would have known there would have been some kind of discovering you or pointing at you, but it was just...
I wasn't expecting the amount of people. It went on the news, like Channel 9 zoomed in on me doing it. It was like, some people failed to stand out. And I was like, oh my gosh.
So they also made, a kind of meta joke about how, of course, the Where's Wally thing is all about finding Wally in a crowded space, and it's really difficult. And so Channel 9 kind of got in on the act.
I love and hate, that's my moment of fame of cosplay, because it's one of the cheapest, most least passionate ones I sort of threw together, and it turned out to be my most successful one.
Because what do you need? The red and white shirts?
Yeah, and like a beanie, some blue jeans or something. Yeah.
Done. And it's distinctive, right? The branding of Where's Wally is clear, easy. It's interesting because it's reminding me a little bit of the other case. I guess is it Adam Savage's well-known YouTube clip where he talks about cosplaying as the no-face character from Spirited Away.
Yep.
Yeah, and he says that, as he was, I think the question was, why do you love cosplay? And he gives this example, which everyone's heard, of how he was at Comic-Con or something, cosplaying as this character, and part of the character's shtick is it can generate gold for people. A wish they want, so often it's gold. And so he had all these gold-covered chocolate coins in that gold wrap, And he was giving them out. And then, he would say that later on he felt something in his hand and people were returning the gift because in universe, in story, it's a cursed gift, right? You're receiving these gifts. And he was, that's that kind of, that audience reaction for him was a revelation in terms of, wow, there's a theatrical dimension. And that does sound like fun and super appealing because you're not being pointed at all the time saying, I found you.
Yeah. Yeah, so with the exception of that and a couple that I've gone, I executed that poorly. There's been, I don't think there's any cosplay of characters that I necessarily think are bad or I'm ashamed of or anything like that.
But we have established not only do you talk the talk, but you walk the walk of your research. So you have cosplayed and embraced it, which, is really central, I guess, to being able to understand the community and engage with it. All right, let's now see where they go next in Kotaku's interpretation of cosplay.
The main difference is commitment and creativity. Cosplayers often put weeks into perfecting their look and hours getting fully costumed for an event.
So what do you think about the time commitment, the energy commitment? Is that a central aspect you found of cosplay?
I think generally it's, I don't know, I hear this argument, but I'm not always convinced. Like, it depends how you define cosplay. Some people say it's not cosplay if you're buying it store-bought.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
everything. And others will say, well, if you're buying it store-bought, if you're dressing up as Where's Wally, we've established it's very easy to cosplay. So I think, like, in that instance, you don't even need makeup. You may not need a wig. You just put on a beanie and that you can go out and that.
But there is a kind of hierarchy that speaks to, isn't there? There's like those people that are arguing, looking a bit snobbishly, I guess, about store-bought stuff. They're placing it a hierarchy that it has to be all handcrafted or your grandma needs to come on board to help stitch.
I definitely admire people who can make full cosplays. I've worked with... I'm not good at sewing, so I've worked with people who are good at sewing and constructed stuff from scratch. And so I do admire when people make stuff from, original and they, look at how things are, the material and saying this is the right material and this is weaved. I think that's so cool. And usually these people will enter the cosplay competitions. They'll win awards. They will get stopped by millions of people and want photos with them. So I think they get rewarded enough to throughout the days to say, like, that those who buy store-bought, they're just showing, I love this character. So I think there is a place for everyone. I think it's just a matter of, the people who do that extra mile, like, power to them, like, well done.
And look, this is what interests me so much about your research. And what we're establishing here are the kind of positive aspects of cosplay experience, right? That it comes from a space of love. It involves a lot of creativity. It can include quite a commitment to skill in terms of being able to handcraft for some, the final result. But in your own research, you point out some of these fault lines, the misogyny, the transmisogyny, the kind of toxicity. So I want to get around to that.
But we'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah, because it is interesting to me that I do think on one level, when we define these terms, it can be utopic, right?
Yeah.
You can end up with quite utopic narratives of what fandom is and what cosplay is.
And we'll definitely come back to how that's framed, but yeah.
All right, let's push on.
Where did cosplaying come from? In the early 20th century, some Americans would dress up as the Martian comic strip character Skygag, which is what William Fell did in 1908 when he...
1908, right. So this is really interesting, this history thing. Because when people ask me about cosplay, I'll often refer to Halloween or something. I'll say, well, in America, there'll be Halloween cosplaying and so forth. But they go all the way back to 1908. Yeah. And when we were listening to this off air, you were kind of a little surprised at how far back that was.
Yeah, so because a lot of my thesis is focused around language and how language is constructed in power within cosplay, I had to look at how would I define cosplay. And so I was looking at all the different ways people defined cosplay, and most will date it to 1939 Worldcon.
Right, which they get around to in a
They
sec,
will get around to. some also attribute it to when the term itself emerged in 1984.
Right, 1984, the
Yeah.
first use of the word cosplay. Where
And-
did that appear?
It was
Is it a fan magazine or something? Or
it was
news
a
report?
it was a writer, I believe a game designer who
1984.
wrote it after observing. I know the name, but I've forgotten the name.
In the West.
This is how dusty it is. It was a Japanese guy
Oh,
who went over to, I think, Worldcon, I think it was,
Right.
and observed this act of dressing up.
So, because I assumed the term was Japanese
Yeah.
because I'd only encountered it first through looking at the Japanese scene. So this was a Japanese language.
Yeah. So he went back and brought it back and
Right.
wrote about what he observed in this crazy
People wearing
place called
Star Trek,
America. Yeah.
right. So he went to like a convention and he saw people wearing Star Trek costumes and so forth. And as he was writing this back for a kind of mainstream magazine, maybe, or
I'm not
a
100%
magazine,
sure. A magazine, yes.
he used the term cosplay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, there's,
Right, 1984 is one of the other dates.
that's
people
where most do. But there was, because we'll talk about Adam Savage before, he did a foreword for a book. I know the last name is Liptak. Came out last year or two.
Okay.
And it goes back into quite far, maybe 200 years into when people were dressing up for like masquerade balls and saying this sort of theme. I thought it was a really
Yeah.
interesting take. So hearing this one was a very interesting. It's not the conventional start date, but it's a bit before when most people say it's from. So.
Because I guess, yeah, what's interesting here is that it's in conversation with a comic book strip, it seems. So
Yeah.
it's in conversation with a pop culture text, whereas it's interesting going back further to the masquerade and so forth. You know, that I guess that kind of... I have in my head those images of the aristocracy going to a ball, and they'll have those, like a flamingo mask on or something.
Yeah.
That's that kind of masquerade vibe they're referencing there, do you
I
reckon?
think it was more fandom-driven masquerade even. So I think there was this sense of it's not a standard masquerade like ball. It's more of a deliberate like dress-up ball.
Right,
So
yeah. And again, it would be the kind of wealthy class doing that, do you think?
I don't
Or-
think so. I think it was this sort of lower class. So that's why they drew upon it. But again, this was the
Right.
only source that cited this. So that's why I find it interesting for this Kotaku.
Because, yeah, I wonder if you could refer to festivals, town festivals, as cosplay. Like those festivals in Japan that go back centuries, where you'd put on a Tengu mask or something, or the Oniya Soto ceremony, and people put on an ogre mask. That... Anyway, it feels like at that point, yes, you're stretching
It's where
somewhat.
where do you stretch it? How far do you stretch it? And I think that's what people have debated with cosplay in particular, and why it's awful to define, and why it would be stupid for someone to go and write a whole thesis about defining terms. But yes, so cosplay, you know, how you define it. Some say it's only Japanese, some say it's Asian oriented. You know, it's vague. So it's an interesting take, and I don't hate it.
Yes, yeah, it's interesting. I don't hate it either. 1908, and again, the thing that I think redeems it is that it's in conversation with a comic book strip, and well, I guess we'll hear him explain it a bit further.
Attended a mass skating carnival in Cincinnati, accompanied by his wife dressed as Diana Dill Pickles. 2 years later, a man was arrested for, quote, masquerading as Skygak in Tacoma. These were the first recorded examples of cosplay. As further advancements were made in technology, sci-fi itself grew in popularity. It became so popular that in 1939, the first ever Worldcon science fiction fair was held in New York. At that
So 1939, that's when you're referring
Yep.
to, and is it only the two people that came?
Well, I believe so. I mean, it's, you know, like 80 years ago. It's a bit hard. So, but it's, but these are the two that are attributed. In most cosplay, even those who define it as 1984 when the term was coined, many will refer back to this as the sort of like, this is another interpretation of when it began.
So what we're about to hear here is two people going to the 1939 sci-fi convention, dressed up as characters from the H.G. Wells movie. Was it The Shape of Things to Come? I think was the movie.
Yeah.
At gathering, sci-fi enthusiasts Myrtle R. Douglas and Forrest Ackerman showed up in what they called futurist costumes, made by Douglas and inspired by the 1939 H.G. Wells film, The Things to Come. By the 1940 Worldcon convention, there were enough people in costume that they held an impromptu costume contest. Where does the word cosplay come from? It's a combination of the words costume and play, creating the word cosplay. Why does so much cosplay?
So they don't refer to it through Japan?
No, they don't. It's vague how they don't do that. It's interesting that they don't do that. But cosplay, costume play. Some people define it as role play, but play is the most common. And I mean, role play, it depends on interpretation of what you want to define it as.
Okay. Pushing on.
Cosplay involve characters from Japanese films or games. Cosplay is a global phenomenon. The explosion of video game content from Japan in the 1980s and the translation of manga to the West influenced and helped continue the transition of cosplay from being centered around science fiction to absorbing the wider world of fantasy and video games.
So that's interesting to me in terms of they don't explain why Japan may have defined it and it taken hold as a term, right? It's not really about the Japanese side of it or a Nihon Jinron theory of the Japanese uniqueness for them to have this view. But they do say what is remarkable is that it broadened the definition, that it spread it from simply being a science fiction thing where, again, I keep going back to Star Trek cosplaying because I think for me that's
I think everything
cliche.
can be attributed to Star Trek in some way.
And that would be that classic American costume that would be worn at a convention. I think Saturday Night Live, and it was lampooned as the default fan costume. Yet here they're saying, what was, I guess, Japan's impact within that? Why did Japanese manga, anime, video games become so central to this costume cosplay space? And they're saying it's not so much an explanation, it's the impact of that has broadened it to simply you're not cosplaying as Star Trek characters, it's now everything, it seems. Is that fair to say?
I would say these days it's either people define it solely Japanese or solely Asian or a combination of that and sci-fi based. So I would say it's broadened. I don't think anyone excludes Japanese cosplayers cosplay. So I do think it's one of the pillars of cosplay.
And it's become like the default term. If you go to a convention, you'll read on the schedule cosplay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And within that, there won't just be people dressing up as Japanese popular culture characters. It could include Spartans from the 300 movie. It could include Doctor Who cosplay.
Depends where you go, which convention as well, because you'll get like, Comic-Con and that, which is quite broad, but then you'll get like anime exclusive conventions and like furry conventions, which will have its own sort of
is furry cosplay? They say furry cosplay?
That is a really good question, because is it taking on your own persona? When does it become real? When does it become a character?
A lot of furry cosplay isn't based... I mean, because one of the core things about their definition of cosplay is it's in conversation with popular culture. Yeah. There's a discrete mothership text, which is the origin of then what you're performing. Yet for furry space, there's no often movie it's from or TV show. It's their own creation often. So, would that on a spectrum would be a different type of.
I would probably... It's a question I've never really thought of, and I could go on a tangent. I worry about it, but
it feels like saying furry cosplay. I've heard people say that, link those two terms together. But if I was going to a cosplay convention or an anime convention or something, and I saw someone in a furry thing, that would be fine.
Is it costuming? I think, that's... It's where there's still a lot of debate on what is what with cosplay.
And I think it's in conversation with just a different set of culture and community expectations, right? Like if I went up to a furry cosplayer, I wouldn't necessarily expect them to talk to me about what movie they're basing it on. It might be what weird mashup of animal they're cosplaying. Like, this is my interpretation of a fox and a deer cosplay or something.
Yeah, well, maybe then it is a cosplay if you're cosplaying a deer. You know, it's this creature, this...
Could be, like, particularly if you've been talking about Disney Bambi. It's a really, like, it's one of those spaces where you could imagine there's quite a bit of gatekeeping.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Within cosplay. All right, well, I feel like we could talk for gatekeeping.
Oh, we could, and yeah.
Okay, but let's push on.
Push on.
Okay, so who does cosplay? From professional cosplayers who appear around the globe to amateurs who go to their local sci-fi conventions, cosplay is for everyone. In that spirit, we're following 6 individuals.
Okay, so who does cosplay? They define 2 communities: professional cosplaying and amateur cosplaying. Does that work for you as a kind of rough and ready who does it?
Professional, unprofessional. I wouldn't say that's the best way to split up cosplayers, but there's some interesting other things they've said, like cosplays for everyone. In my thesis, one of my respondents noted when I asked age, like I didn't think anything would come of age, and they said, I'm so glad you have 65 plus in your options because cosplay is for everyone. Yes. That was, I believe, a quote by one of the participants. So there is this perception and that it is for everyone, and there is a sense that there is this inclusion. And I think part of where we'll go to with my thesis in a minute is showing that even within this sort of inclusive space, there is still issues, and we can't be complacent with this sense of it is solely an inclusive space. There's still areas of marginalization.
And this, for me, is such an interesting paradox that on one hand you have video clips like this that will quite importantly celebrate cosplay. And I think there would be a kind of culture maybe of having to struggle with the stigma attached with and explain what cosplaying is. Yet even within that community, there can be tension.
Yeah, definitely.
And gatekeeping and so forth. So, all right, let's jump in then with this idea of, I guess, what was the motivation for doing this? Was it Where's Wally and trying to wrestle with that experience?
Oh, if only. So, very much for me, one of the great things about my thesis for anyone who wants to read it is the first 2 pages is about a personal narrative, and it is the nice part of reading without it getting too dry. The rest gets a bit dry. I'm not necessarily including that.
Well, it is an academic.
But yeah, no, I sort of outline, for me, I saw cosplaying as a means of exploring my own gender identity. I wasn't completely comfortable expressing myself more feminine when I was early on in my transition. But I saw cosplay as a space where I could, cosplay female characters and be comfortable with that. So I recount that in particular because my paper's about areas of discomfort and and whatnot in cosplay. I remember as I was cosplaying a female character, and I was, very happy. I was there first thing into the convention. Everything was excited. And 2 people came up, and one of them was cosplaying the same character as me and wanted a photo with me. And so I said, yeah, sure. And it was at that moment they said, oh, you're a trap. And so it was suddenly that a 180, I went from feeling really empowered and I'm cosplaying and no one's saying anything. And then there was this, you are a male cosplaying this female character. You're perceived as male and, you're trying to deceive people as being this female, but you're not.
And that's that term trap.
Yeah. So...
Right. And you were, last week when we were going over the project, you referred to this term, the trap term. I'd been unfamiliar with it, and I was fascinated to hear the origins of it. So as you're saying, it's referring to a kind of, I guess, an incel kind of stereotype male who is very heteronormative and will then encounter something he perceives first as female, but then feels that they've been trapped into that emotion of kind of, enjoyment, celebration, empowerment, to instead say, "Oh, you're not what I wanted. I feel horrible. You've made me feel uncomfortable, and so I declare that you've trapped me." Allah, and you were saying this came from the Return of the Jedi, the Captain Akbar character.
So because there's this term's been around for would have been over 20 years now. It's been in circulation. Many people don't understand the origin of this term, and it's sort of gone through this weird transition of understanding of what it means, how it means. So if you go back to its original meaning, it came out of around 2002, early 2002. The furthest back I could find it was in May. And it was being used as it was a commemorative plate, the earliest one I could find, of Admiral Akbar saying, "It's a trap in a van," like a Volkswagen. And it was just a meme, everyone was going, "It's a trap, haha, it's funny." It wasn't used for anything malicious. It was just a in-joke amongst the Something Awful forum. So it was used on like Comedy Goldmine and some of these other forums. And then because of the regulation of pornography on Something Awful, and I guess some of the content regulation, one of the users called Moot went off and formed 4chan. So 4chan then took a lot of these this term, trap, and was using it in sort of this meme culture of characters like Bridget in particular from Guilty Gear, and saying, "Oh, it's a trap, you think you're getting this, but it's a trap." It's sort of the bait and switch, sort of like Rickrolling.
Yes.
So they took that, they adopted it, and at the same time on 2chan and Futaba, you had this similar term with otokonoko being this sort of male boy, like male girl, sort of this sort of more girly boy, sort of femboy might be a more closer translation, but there's still some connotations there. But this sort of portmanteau of masculine and feminine particles to form this sort of term to refer to this sort of cross-dressing but even wider reaching diversity. So from that we got this sort of two terms being used on very similar platforms to describe the same characters, and so there became this sort of synonymous usage between the two terms. And so that's what led so many anime community who weren't using it for a malicious context, but it was very malicious in the sense of it being used for trans people, and it's just horrid.
Yeah, look, and it's such a fascinating story to hear the origin of your research coming from a space of feeling excluded. That must have been such a... How did you go forward for the rest of the day? What was it like after that?
The rest of the day, that really stuck with me. Like the fact that stuck with me the whole day was just... It's... For a while, it was sort of like, I don't know how to feel. Like, I feel so mixed. I think I was sorting out being the character, the photo, the fact it was so early on. I had 100 other things going on in my mind. And so it was like processing all these things at once and trying to like deal with my own gender identity, this experience. And it just sort of, it took a while for me to really process what it was like in that experience. And it's really, there's part of the story I didn't include in my thesis, but I'm going to share it now.
Thank you.
The good gossip. One of the two people, the one who didn't call me a trap, but was the one cosplaying, was actually someone who I met again years later doing a maid cafe. And they're absolutely lovely, and they hate that person who they were with at that time. So I don't know the full drama there, but no, they said, oh yeah, I've got the photo, and they sent me that saved photo.
Right,
so I've got that
just
saved.
kind of empowered.
So I didn't include it in my thesis. I didn't want to because also with ethics and consideration of including this full narrative, because one of my supervisors questioned, like, how can you be sure that these people identify as female? And I'm like, because I know one of them now. So yeah, but it was just one of those weird coincidences where I think I even started writing my thesis when they sent me that photo. So it was like a real, like, oh my gosh moment.
It's fascinating to have wrestled with that kind of in isolation.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're reconnected in a really intimate way.
And they're really supportive of me and everything now and that. But it was that sort of like understanding that language can hurt, even if it's unintended, it can still hurt and marginalize. And I think that's what my, I guess, crux of my thesis was sort of exploring, was the good and bad of cosplay, especially for gender diverse individuals.
What are the because I guess as much as defining again the term cosplay as positively as the clip was discussing in terms of it's an expression of the love, it requires a lot of energy and so forth. It's also an immense risk to step out in the public space, isn't it? To be that identity. Is there something about that publicness of it, that it's not like you're just going to a friend's party and it's a costume party and you're with friends still? You're in this public sphere all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think part of why in a positive lens, is that you're becoming this, like, for me, it's very much becoming this identity you identify with. And so for me, with that character, I was able to, wear a skirt out for the first time and that. And so it was really empowering in that sense. And at the same time, you also, you're out in society, you feel somewhat safe in this space because people aren't questioning you, because they don't say, oh, you can't do that, or like, hey, look at that strange person. It's like, oh, you're cosplaying, that's normal. So there's this sort of normative stuff. But even doing that, there is this sort of risk, and language was one instance. And one that I sort of briefly touch on at the end of the thesis is talking about going to the toilet in your cosplay, and that, like, do you if you're cross-dressing or cross-playing and and if you're gender diverse, you have got like 5 levels of identity you're dealing with. Going to the toilet is like, I can't use the male, I can't use the female. The gender neutral one maybe, but sometimes some venues didn't have gender neutral toilets. So.
And I could imagine, yes, if you're overthinking that problem of how others will react, suddenly you can find yourself, I imagine, quite naturally completely tied up and unable to act, because it's like, well, if I go to the female toilet, but while I'm dressed female, I'm male, that's going to cause awkwardness potentially. If I go to the male toilet, well, I've already encountered toxic male, I'm a trap experience that's going to possibly happen again. What can I do? It does bring down that idea that, I guess, as much as these environments kind of, I guess, Huizinga talks about that kind of magic circle that can happen in video gaming or whatever, or games, where everyone agrees on certain rules, that when we're doing this game, kicking the ball through this hoop will mean these points. Great magic circle, but then you find that some people aren't going to play by these rules, and that the real world will still intrude into the safe space.
I have a chapter talking about this concept of the inclusive fandom, and I absolutely, it's the one chapter I wish I could rewrite, because it's not the best worded, and I think it's better explained orally than furthermore, like just in writing, at least in that paper. But the way I explain this sort of fandom space is more like a leaking shack in the rain. So it's raining outside. You've got this torrent of rain coming down, and you're in a field, and the only thing there is a shack. And so you go into this shack to get out of the rain, but there's holes in the roof, so you're still going to get wet, but it's better than being out in the field. So it's the same sort of concept. You're still being impacted by this sort of wider society oppression and the views of wider society.
Yes.
But it's better because at least you're shielded to some degree. So that's sort of what I wanted to get out and develop out of it. This sort of like, it's not completely removed from society. Oppression still exists in it, whether it's language, whether it's going to the toilet. You still have to contest with this wider transmisogyny, wider oppressive nature of society, this wider control, surveillance. But it's better than wider society where you couldn't do that without definitely getting scrutiny.
It's so, I mean, I think one of the challenges is maybe a more general, it reminds me of a more general thing that, you know, people sometimes fixate on that negative experience over the top of those positive experiences. And as you're saying, you know, you're still in the shack and dry enough. You're not going to get fully dry now because there's leaks in the shack. So similarly with cosplay, yes, it does provide permission to cosplay as others, as a kind of robot. So you can unproblematically, it seems, cosplay as all these different identities, a robot identity, a plant, all these other things. But some identities may still become, you know, problematic for others. Yeah. And I guess it's not for you, but again, it's so difficult being able to not lose hope. That, you know, yes, while there was one negative experience there was enough positive there to still feel empowering. Because as you were saying, how did the day go? So you had that one negative experience. Was there still positive experiences there?
Oh, absolutely. There were many. You know, you meet someone, you like one of those guest stars, you get a signing from them, and you're like over the moon and that, and
you remained in costume for the rest of the day.
Yeah. And you know, like when some people say, "Oh, I love your outfit," and things like that. Like you have all these experiences, and some people say, "Gosh, you're so pretty," and things like that. Like it's you get these positive experiences, but you know, for every negative experience, you need like 10 positive ones to outweigh it.
Say,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
But I guess part of this is also wrestling with having you know, kind of more realistic expectations of fandom. It is an interesting theoretical space to unpack in terms of even fan theory itself seems to have gone through those cycles of at first being criticized as too utopic about fandom, and you know, you could even look at early internet theory equally being too positive about how exciting this is going to be, not realizing that, you know, you can have right-wing fans, you can have, you know, a lot of anti-fans. There can be toxic space within fandom just as well as there is in politics.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's part of my thesis is sort of saying, look, it is a generally good space. It is better than wider society in this regard, but it's not flawless. And here are some of the issues, and for some of the marginalized identities, I don't talk about racism in it, but there's a number of papers out there talking about how racism is still a significant issue in the cosplay community.
So within your research, what were some of the other examples you encountered around the impact of that gender diversity issue within cosplay?
Well, what I found really interesting was when I set out, I was very much interested in understanding how people really perceived the terminology of, like, do you find it offensive? Do you find it not offensive? Basically, why?
So these would be terms like trap?
Trap, otokonoko, crossplay, and genderbend.
So crossplay is when, as you were saying, you identify as male, but you'd have a female character that you're cosplaying as.
Yeah, definitely.
So you identify as male, but you're cosplaying as Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
Otokonoko is...
It's more that sort of synonymous with trap, so I wanted to compare the two because of that sort of similarity of these two terms. How are people perceiving these two terms? Do people know of these terms? Do they like them, hate them? Do they share the similarities? Will people say, isn't this the same as this term, you know?
And the tokonoko, a Japanese term,
Japanese, yeah.
otoko, boy, male,
Yeah.
no ko is like boy.
So it can be like male young girl, male princess. It's playing with kanji and that to get different meanings and
Right.
that. So it's really like a portmanteau of sort of this sort of masculine and feminine particles to bring it together to sort of say it's neither really.
And as you say, there's been awkward translations that don't fit, such as femboy.
Yeah, it's not quite a proper translation, but it is certainly better than trap. And I actually, one of the comparisons is more so, and what I draw out of it is there isn't a good translation in English.
Of a tokonoko.
Yeah, and I say some of the better translations would be, I think it's katui, which is a term that we most commonly translate as ladyboy, which is this sort of identity that isn't necessarily male female that emerged out of a lot of South Asian sort of countries, and even the indigenous sort of brother boy sister girls, and that to explain gender diversity. So I think it's just we don't have a proper understanding within our current English lexicon to describe this sort of gender identity. So we draw upon these existing terms and concepts, but it's not right to do that. We need to coin it as its own sort of term.
Fascinating, isn't it? Because it does reflect a kind of impoverishment or stigmatization or avoidance of this identity, this being itself. The struggle for a term that isn't toxic, full of negative connotations, isn't there.
Yeah, exactly.
Using Japanese terms, otoko no ko. How is do you know much about how otoko no ko is taken up in Japan? Is it similarly stigmatized or?
It's not. It's actually really interesting because it's been adopted by a number of the gender diverse community, because the terms prior to that, especially Japanese terms, were used like okama and a lot of these really negative connotated words. So this didn't have the same sort of negative connotation. So it was used by gender diverse individuals as well as like cross-dressers and that. And that's why it's not just, a masculine identifying feminine looking person. It's also the gender diverse community and that. And that's all fits within this particular term.
Otoko no ko.
Yeah. And so there was actually a anime series that came out last season called Senpai wa Otoko no ko. So Senpai is an Otoko no ko. And it's really interesting because I spent ages looking through the comments because I was like, this is going to be brilliant in a really academic sense, and seeing people go, oh no, they're a femboy, oh no, they're trans. And I'm like thinking, Otoko no ko doesn't really translate as one way or the other. It's in this sort of middle vagueness.
Yes.
And there's enough sort of ambiguity there that you just go, this here is its own category outside, and we don't have an English term for this particular sense of identity.
And did the show Senpai
wa Otoko no ko.
Senpai wa Otoko no ko, is it a parody, a pastiche? Is it a kind of?
It's a really heartfelt story.
Oh, okay, right.
It's a really beautiful story in a sense that it doesn't make fun. It takes it very serious. You've got like narratives of the Makoto, who is the Otoko no ko character. Their mother is very troubled by this sense of them being dressing feminine, liking feminine things, and it comes out of struggles with her own quote unquote father being in essentially, it's not established whether they're trans or a cross-dresser. Again, that sort of vagueness. But because of that and that sort of fear and rejection and dealing with this sort of parent going through this same sort of transition, they didn't want that for their own child, and this rejection and everything. So it was really heartfelt. It had these sort of romance. It was taken very serious and that, and dealing with how do you identify how you want to dress, the struggles of dealing with how to fit in and conform to society. So it's actually a really good story, and it's getting a movie, thankfully. It's one of the few series that actually gets adapted. So
because I was going to ask if you had any recommendations.
Yeah.
Sadly, I've realised we've only got 4 minutes left. Would you believe we've only got 4 minutes left?
I'm
up
quick.
to question 2 of my 12.
Rapid fire. Let's go.
That's right. Yes, no. But I do feel it's been so useful being able to wrestle, I guess, with defining some core terms, because it does strike me how aggressively we actually do police these gendered identities still. And as you're saying, cosplay is wonderful and that play space is central to it. But honestly, how safe is that play space? What are the risks involved? What I guess with the time we've got left, what's your current and future work around this? So you finished the MA, and can people access that anyway?
Yeah, so so many things to condense into
We'll
a
have
couple
to come
minutes.
back. We'll come back for part
One thing
2
I'll
in the
say
future.
is that through my research, one of the unintended findings was that 30%, just under 30% of the cosplaying community identified as gender diverse. Just over 50% were cisgender female. I didn't look at sexuality at all. So it is a very queer space and a very feminine dominated space. So
this was the cosplay community.
Yes.
Your sample set was a kind of forum goes? Was it like a Reddit sub-channel, or was it
I put out a survey.
costume?
I
Right.
put out a survey, said fill it in.
All right.
I split it up.
Where did you circulate the survey?
Went into many different cosplay groups, anime clubs, and just said, fill this in.
So you'd have like mainstream anime clubs. These would be the established ones in Australia. Was it overseas as well?
No, just Australia. So
Australia?
yeah, this is only Australia, but it's also consistent with another finding that showed about 23%. So it's a bit bigger than that one, but it shows a very high participation by the gender diverse community.
So a lot of people identified as queer?
It was the gender diverse in particular.
Gender diverse,
Not
so the question was-
not whether you're same-sex attracted, not whether you're asexual, just if you identify outside of cisgender male, cisgender female. So
And that percentage was...
I think it was 29.4%.
Wow.
So yeah.
So again, clearly people find this as a safe space, an encouraging space in many ways to be able to explore, to be in between.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a really startlingly
It is a big
high
number,
Well, not
yeah.
startling, it's a really encouragingly
Yeah.
high number.
It was really shocking. And so part of that is you can find the full research online if you search gender language, Ashley Remminga on Google Scholar. It's free access. Anyone can access it. You can find my full writings on that. But also, it's sort of, while writing it, made me realize this sort of understanding around gender bending and diversity in stories, narratives, pop culture, Japanese pop culture, and how it translates to Australian audiences was very lacking. So my PhD is now looking at gender diversity and I guess gender disruptive themes in anime and manga, and looking at how gender diverse people may read these texts, form affirmation or rejection of these texts.
That's so. I mean, we're definitely gonna have to get you back in, because I do find that when I was doing manga anime research way back in like '96 for my PhD, a lot of the debate there was very heteronormative. It was mainly around looking at early harem manga and anime. There were a number of texts critiquing the fact that a lot of the anime that was in fan clubs and that was popular was kind of like I Dream of Jeannie level. It was like Fushigi Yugi. Oh, not Fushigi Yugi. It was... I'll have to get all the list of these kind of harem anime, I guess. These kind of early
The Love
harem anime.
Hinas.
Love Hina, that's it. And those are very male fantasies.
Yeah.
Yet here we have also the idea today, and that conversation was certainly probably back there in the mid-90s, but the kind of engagement and the public conversation around gendered identity wasn't at the same fault line as it seems to be at the moment. So it would be so fascinating to look at how anime manga today is involved in this conversation that you're currently pursuing in your research.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at the shift between narratives and what was being shown in one era versus now, and the types of stories emerging and the themes that are emerging, and like isekai being reborn is bringing in a lot.
What are you doing, Ashley? Now there's another key
Sorry,
term.
sorry, I won't.
Isekai is fantastic. Yeah, that
like
portal.
that reborn and that. So yeah, there's so much going on in terms of themes. That's great.
We do have great news here on Edge Radio. Ashley will be involved in producing some pre-produced short-form podcast contents. Hopefully we'll have something to even circulate on Edge Radio by the end of the year.
Yep.
You're hoping to create some nice little deep dives into theory and example for people to engage with here on Edge Radio, so we'll probably broadcast some of that. And, of course, it'd be wonderful to get you back on Media Mothership.
Would love to
finish the next 10 questions they have of the master's thesis. But yeah, no, look, so wonderful, so exciting to be able to dive into this world. A lot of it I was completely unfamiliar with in terms of... yes, I'd love to get some homework. I'll make sure on the show notes for this episode, there'll be a link to where you can further get some information about Ashley's research. But thank you so much for being involved.
Thank you.
And next week, we're pausing, actually. There's no show next week or the week after. I'll be doing some field research in Launceston on things. I'll be maybe looking for spontaneous cosplay environments.
Yeah, wonderful.
Have you ever heard? Is there any cosplay in Launceston? Have you put your
I know.
feelers out?
There was the Icon photo shoots here in Hobart, but I'm not sure about Launceston.
Yeah. There is fan action there. I know they do the Icon Anime Island convention spin-offs up there, so certainly there. Feel free to SMS if you've got any information on that, 0488811707. You can listen to previous episodes of Media Mothership on YouTube, Twitch, and at edgeradio.org.au. It's also out on podcasts through your podcast provider of choice. You can find out more about Media Mothership on Facebook and Instagram. In terms of people finding out more information about Ashley, you've got a UTAS research page.
I do, yes.
So you can search at the University of Tasmania as well. And you've got bits and pieces of other stuff?
I've got like Twitter or X, but I can't post trans without getting banned. So I don't know how long I'll be on that for. So
just search Ashley Remminga. Certainly for UTAS to find out further research that you've done. And again, I look forward to getting you on the show in the near future. Yeah. You know, it would be fantastic. In fact, I've already got 10 different topics now from today's show.
I'll give you even more off air.
That's right. All right, keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3 FM.
Listen back to all your favourite